Hello lovely viewers, you are most welcome to our channel Poetry Online. In this video, we shall be discussing the summary, analysis, and major themes of the poem One Wife for One Man by Frank Imoukhouede. Kindly subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to get updates on all our new videos. Once again, let us assure you of a very interesting discussion. Get ready for this lesson. Let us begin with a short biography of the poet. Frank Imoukhouede is a Nigerian journalist and poet who was the secretary of the National Council of Arts and Culture in mid-1970s. The council was set up to revolutionize arts and culture in Nigeria. He was also a cultural officer in early 1970s and was notable for supporting the development of cultural programs catered to children. Frank Imoukhouede was born on January 8, 1935. He went to Igbobi College and after completing a secondary education, he entered the University of Ibadan in 1955. At Ibadan, he participated in the poetry magazine, The Horn. This led to a poem of his included in an anthology. In the 1960s, he was the feature editor with the Daily Service and later went to serve as an information officer in the Western and Midwestern region. He was also a scriptwriter with the Federal Film Unit. He is also known for his pidgin poems, including One Wife for One Man, a satirical and critical look at polygamy and foreign cultural incursion into Africa. The use of pidgin language may signify a move to connect and please a native Nigerian individual, as it is a language that is suitable and native to the country. The coming of the white man brought many things along with it, one of the most enduring being their culture or ways of life. The European culture introduced strange and surprising things to Africans. Most of these things were easily rejected, while a few, especially material artifacts, were enthusiastically embraced by both commoners and the nobilities. As Africans got more and more exposed to European ways of life through Western education, they found more aspects of it very fascinating but complicated. Frank Imoukhouede, being one of those privileged to access Western education when it was readily available to only a few Africans, happened to experience this uncanny fascination. Yet, the familiar, simple, and natural life of his people seemed too enriching and graceful to be abandoned. This was the experience of many of the early educated elites in Africa. With the colonization of the African continent and the subsequent introduction of Western values and ways of life, many Africans, especially those educated in Western ways, consciously distanced themselves from the traditional beliefs, practices, and general ways of life of their people. They saw them in the light their white masters would have them do. They saw them as primitive, retrogressive, and even barbaric. The setting of the poem is Africa, though it can be narrowed down to Nigeria, where broken English or pidgin is widely spoken. The temporal setting is clearly the colonial era or pre-independence period. It was a period when most of the new African educated elites, especially in West Africa, were eager to look like, behave like, sound like, and act like the whites, as they saw the white man's culture as the standard for measuring civility and excellence. It was an era of craze for white values and civilization, as well as conscious attempt to denigrate African values or look down on the few who treasured it among the new educated elites. Psychologically, it was a time when many of the new educated elites grappled with cultural complex and inferiority complex for that matter. At the time this poem was written, African writers were examining the impacts of the conflicts of dealing with the local and foreign cultures in the life of the African, finding themselves in the mesh of interrelations between Africa and Europe. The poets, and for that matter, Africans, live with a clash of emotions arising from this contact. This poem is set in colonial times. The traditional culture has been supplanted by the new but foreign culture. Africans in this situation see a huge contradiction, and those who are conscious of it live with the emotions of humiliation. The reason is that both tradition and modernity subsist in the African continent. The poem, One Man for One Wife, focuses on the popular theme of clash of culture in African literature. It explores an aspect of African culture and Western or European culture in terms of marriage. In doing this, the poet uses polygamy, which is practiced in Africa, and monogamy, which is practiced in Western countries. Through a comparison of the attributes of these types of marriages and what they are capable of engendering, the two types of marriages are commented upon. However, the comments are dissimilar. In his depiction of the African culture, the poet uses some expressions which shows that he is more favorably disposed to it than his Western counterpart. Both thematically and structurally, the poem makes use of contrast. The main idea in the poem is developed around two contrasting marriages. These are polygamy, associated with Africa, and monogamy, which is identified with Europe. They are used symbolically to represent the different cultures of people from these two geographical entities. The poet tries to examine which one of the two types of marriages is most suitable for the African, or fits perfectly into the African context. The major theme of the poem revolves around conflicts of cultures. The cultures in question, as we said earlier on, are the European culture and the African culture. The theme of dilemma also features in this poem. While the poet speaks glowingly of African culture or polygamy, he also finds European culture, which is represented by monogamy. Despite its shortcomings, this culture is widespread, popular, and prevalent everywhere. Thus, most Africans are unable to decide whether to go the way of the inherited culture or embrace the new one. This is the plight of many educated African elites today. The poet equally presents the nostalgia of most Africans. Nostalgia is a longing for the past. The poet is someone who has experienced both tradition and modernity. However, he longs or wants to go back to the good old days. The African continent is faced with a conflict of the way to go. The poetic speaker suffers from the conflict of the way to go, having been bombarded by the influences of two cultures, which are the African culture and the European culture. However, he presents the African ideology of marriage, which is polygamy, with a sense of approval, while the Western ideology of monogamy is portrayed with some sort of disapproval, which makes it unsuitable for the African. Another interesting thing about this poem is the fact that, unlike other poets in Africa, the poet deviates from the use of standard English to use broken or pidgin English, which is substandard, to convey his message. What it simply means is that the message of this poem is for all and sundry. It is not for only the educated, it is not for only the uneducated or the illiterate, it is for everybody because pidgin has a wider coverage than standard English. So, the poet uses pidgin English to convey his message. It is worth noting that the spelling of words in this poem reflects their pronunciation and not the way they are originally spelled in English. That is, the poet employs both graphological and phonological deviation to help him convey his message. When we talk about graphological deviation, the poet departs from the conventional or the well-known system of writing. That is, the words that we are going to encounter in this poem might have the same pronunciation with the words in standard English, but their spellings are different. This makes them graphological deviation. And phonological deviation, we are going to find words that sound similar to words in standard English, but their pronunciations are a bit different because of their pronunciation. So we can confidently say that our poet used both graphological and phonological deviation to help him convey his message. Every stanza in this poem ends with, "When one wife is for one man." This serves as a refrain. A refrain is a line or group of lines that regularly repeats, usually at the end of a stanza in a poem or at the end of a verse in a song. Refrains are popular devices in speeches because repetition is memorable, musical, and can also help to give a common structure and meaning to disparate ideas. These qualities are particularly important in speeches because the audience must be able to understand and remember complex ideas without the ability to rewind or parse a phrase for its meaning. Thus, the refrain, coupled with the use of pidgin, helps us to easily understand and identify with the poet. That is to say, we are able to understand the complex idea of monogamy and to appreciate polygamy that is practiced in Africa. Writers use refrain in their poem in order to drive a point home, aid a reader or listener's memory, establish central themes, and create structure. Repeated words or phrases stick more easily in the reader's or listener's mind and accentuate the structure and rhythm of what is being said. Let us now take our first reading of the poem. I dey try go church, I don't go for court. The more they talk about the new culture, them talk about equality, them mention divorce, them how long I'm so tame my ear nearly cut, one wife, be for one man. My father before my father got a wife boku, he no get equality palava, he live well, for he be oga for him own house. But that time don't pass, before white man come with him, one wife for one man. Tell me how woman no go make nyanga when he no say na him only day. Suppose say make God no gree, he no born at all. I tell you that man been the craze, where start one wife for one man. Just tell me how one wife fit do one man. How you go fit stay all time for him house, for time when belle don't comot. For how many pikin self one woman fit born when one wife be for one man. Suppose self na so woman your wife dey born. Suppose your wife sabi book, no sabi make chop. Then how you go tell man make he no go out? Sake of this divorce, bo, this culture na wow, when one wife be for one man. After reading the poem for the first time, let us try a translation of the poem. I tried going to the church. I tried going to the court. All they talk about is this new culture. They talk about equality and divorce. They shouted so much that my eardrums nearly cut. One wife for one man. My father's father had many wives. He lived well without all this equality, and he was the boss of his own house. But that was before the white man came with his ideology of one wife for one man. Tell me how a man can keep a woman from being bossy, or how a man can prevent a woman from being stubborn, or prevent a woman from nagging, when she knows that she has no rival, or she is the only one. Assuming it is God's will, may God forbid, that she has no children, I tell you, the man who suggested or started one wife for one man must have been crazy. Just tell me how one woman is enough for a man. What can make a man stay home all the time when his only wife is pregnant? How many children can one woman even bear when there's just one wife for one man? Assuming your wife has only female children, assuming your wife is educated and doesn't know how to cook, then how can you tell a man that he can't escape unless he divorces her? Man, this new culture is terrible with one wife for one man. After attempting a translation of the poem, let us take a stanza by stanza analysis of the poem, starting with the first stanza. I dey try go church, I don't go for court. The more they talk about the new culture, them talk about equality, them mention divorce, them how long I'm so tame my ear nearly cut, one wife be for one man. The poet begins his poem by informing us of some of the Western institutions he has been to, which are the church and the court. What it simply means is that the wives or colonial masters have already fully established themselves in the African continent. Therefore, we find Africans visiting institutions like the church and the court. He makes an interesting revelation that these two institutions heavily dwell on. Thus, the court and the church both dwell heavily on equality, which is a good thing. Surprisingly, the mere mention of divorce brings some kind of contrast in the Western culture. Thus, all does not seem to be okay with this culture. This is a culture that is preaching equality, a culture that will tell married couples that they have to be equal or they have to play equal roles in a marriage, and when they are not satisfied with that, they can demand for divorce. What the poet is trying to tell us is that the Western culture preaches monogamy, which demands that the man and the wife are equal or play equal roles in a marriage. What the poet wants to tell us is simple. The new culture, which is foreign or alien to the African tradition, is something that preaches equality. This is so because the Western culture is preaching monogamy, which demands that the husband and the wife are equal or play equal roles in a marriage. But the thing with this new culture is that there is no support system for such marriages as it preaches divorce to its victims. We are also informed that both the courts and the church are talking about this new culture, which is one man for one wife. That is, everywhere you find yourself, people are talking about one man for one wife. One man for one wife is technically known as monogamy, something that is alien to the African culture. That is, when you find yourself in a church, you can't marry more than one. Neither can you marry more than one in the courts. That is, in Western institutions, you can't marry more than one. They practice monogamy. The new culture being talked about is monogamy, an aspect of the Western culture. The poet equally informs us of the popularity of the idea of one man for one wife. This ideology has become so popular that it is talked about almost all the time, or it features most in public conversations. The repetitive, blaring, clamorous, and deafening effects of the talks of monogamy is so powerful that it has nearly cut off the ear of our poetic speaker. This is just a deliberate attempt to tell us the widespread or popularity of the idea of monogamy. This is to inform us that monogamy became prevalent in Africa soon after they encountered the Western world. Let's now move to the second stanza. My father before my father got him wife boku. He no get equality palava. He live well, for he be oga for him own house. But that time don't pass before white man come with him, one wife one man. In the second stanza, the poet expresses his nostalgia for the good old days. Nostalgia, as we said earlier, is the longing for the past. Having experienced both tradition and modernity, our poetic speaker longs for the past where marriages were not guided by distorted notions of equality and divorce, a time where marriages were lifelong and not a one-day wonder as it happens today. He informs us that his grandparents practiced monogamy and what's more, they lived well without the distorted Western notions of equality and divorce. The older generation had no business whatsoever with the word equality. However, marriages around that time lasted longer than that of today, which is true. Contrary to the popular belief that polygamy breeds envy, jealousy, hatred, and inequality, the poet tells us that his grandparents lived well. Thus, we can deduce from this sentence that his grandparents lived a life that was free from envy, jealousy, hatred, and inequality. The poet in this stanza showcases the conflict of the way to go suffered by Africans at that time. The poetic speaker suffers from the conflict of the way to go, having been bombarded by the influences of two cultures. However, he knows exactly what he wants, and that is, he wants to practice polygamy. The institutional conflict depicted in this poem reflects the traditional legal system as against the European structure of legal system. We are informed that, in the past, the poet's grandfather had a lot of wives, and on top of that, he was the oga or boss of his own house. That is, there was nothing like feminist idea of equality or the man and the woman are the same in the house. No, the man was the oga or boss of his house. All powers in the house were vested in the man. We can derive from the point that their marriage was free from excessive drama, breakups, and other shortcomings in marriages as we see today. They achieved these feats without the European notion of equality and divorce. Thus, what the poet is trying to tell us is that Africans do not really need a Western lifestyle and ideologies to live an ideal and peaceful life. The old ways of doing things is worth holding on to. The poet concludes this stanza by informing readers that those days are over since the coming of the white man has introduced strangers to Africans. The poet clearly informs us that in Africa, the advent of the white civilization mission brought about the rejection of the African culture. The impact of the spread of Christianity, combined with material benefits, forced many Africans to abandon their own faith and tradition and adopt the religion of the white men. This is something that is alien and contradictory to the African culture. This situation is responsible for the natives' cultural alienation. The coming of the whites to Africa introduced different forms of conflicts. Thus, with their coming, we saw a lot of conflicts in Africa, some of which includes cultural conflicts. We find cultural conflicts when the arrival of the European disturbed the cultural elements of the society. Thus, naming ceremony, puberty rite, festivals, marriages, funeral rites, and other ceremonies are not done as they used to be done in the past. We equally have religious conflicts, and this has to do with the introduction of Christianity and its opposition to the traditional religious practice of Africa. We equally have social conflicts. This shows in social choices, as in the number of wives a man could take, just like the poem we are studying, or the choices one can make in social life. We equally have institutional conflict, which reflects the traditional legal system as against the European structure of legal system, as in this poem, written by imoukhouede Francis, one man for one wife. All these conflicts boxed together destroy the beauty of the African continent. Let's now move to the third stanza. Tell me how woman no go make nyanga when e know say na him only dey. Suppose say make God no gree, e no born at all. I tell you that man been the craze wey start one wife for one man. In the third stanza, the poet begins to tell us of the shortcomings of monogamous marriages, which makes them an inappropriate choice for him, and for that matter, all Africans. He begins this stanza by asking the rhetorical question, tell me how una woman no go make nyanga when e know say na him only dey. What it simply means is that polygamy prevents women from nagging, harassing men, irritating, and pestering their husbands. Most importantly, polygamy prevents women from being troublesome. Once a man has more than one wife, they work together or they work hard to serve their husband in order to win his favor. He went ahead to pose another question to the readers that, what will you do if a woman, may God forbid, has been destined by God not to give birth? Will you rather marry another woman or divorce her, as the new culture preaches? In this stanza, the speaker shows his displeasure for the European institution of marriage with his choice of words coupled with the tone of the poem. He describes the absurdity of monogamy in strong terms. He says, I tell you that man being the craze will start one wife for one man. Here, he calls the European ideology of monogamy as crazy. He sees it to be irrational, senseless, ridiculous, and absolutely silly. Let's shift our focus to the fourth stanza. Just tell me how one wife fit do one man. How you go fit stay all time for him house, for time when belle don comot. For how many pikin self one woman fit born when one wife be for one man. In the fourth stanza, the poet continues to argue logically in an attempt to convince readers of his point of view, to reason with him, and see the benefits and beauty in polygamy. He asks that, how can one woman be enough for a man? He continues by saying that, what can make a man stay home all the time when his only wife is pregnant? As if those questions aren't enough, he went on to say that, how many children can one woman even bear? You have to bear in mind that This poem was written at a time when there was a need for larger family size for the purpose of social status and economic benefits as in cheap labor. Let's now move to the final stanza of the poem. Suppose tell, na so woman your wife dey born. Suppose your wife sabi book, no sabi make chop. Then how you go tell man make e no go out? Sake of this divorce, bo, this culture na wow, when one wife be for one man. In the last stanza, the poet continues with his logical argumentation in favor of polygamy. He says that, assuming the wife you have is giving birth to only female children, will you rather marry another woman to bear male children for you or divorce her? Assuming the wife you have is learned, educated, scholarly, or an academician, but she can't cook, what will you do? Will you rather get another wife who can cook, or you will divorce your wife who is learned, educated, and scholarly just because she can't cook? The answer is no and no and no. You wouldn't do that. That is to say, polygamy is necessary. It is used to fill in for the shortcomings of women or the imperfections that comes with women. Once one woman cannot do one thing, the other might be able to do that. And when you have them in a house, they work together for the overall good of the family. In short, what other viable or workable alternative does a monogamous man have than to divorce a wife he is not pleased with? He concludes the poem by saying that this new culture is disgusting, it is sickening, repulsive, and above all, this new culture is terrible. Let's now consider the major themes of the poem. In this poem, we come across the theme of cultural clash. We come across the theme of nostalgia. Thanks for watching this video. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share this video.